In this opening statement, Representative Jamie Raskin addresses the looming expiration of FISA Section 702 and delivers a stark warning about the direction of U.S. surveillance policy. While acknowledging years of bipartisan cooperation on national security, Raskin argues that the federal government has failed a critical test, protecting Americans' constitutional rights while wielding powerful intelligence tools. With Section 702 set to expire next year, he calls on Congress to confront growing abuses, unchecked data collection, and the erosion of privacy in an era of mass surveillance and big tech collaboration.
Section 702 expires April 19th next year. This gives us 4 months to put together a bill that prioritizes protecting Americans' fundamental constitutional rights while preserving a program that advances national security. Over the years, FISA has remained a subject of bipartisan collaboration on this committee, and I really want to thank Chairman Jordan and Chairman Biggs for working with all of the members of the committee to protect American civil liberties. When Congress reauthorized Section 702 last Congress, we gave the executive branch 2 years to show that it could protect civil liberties without the need for greater judicial oversight. We said that we would rely on the FBI's promise that the modest changes, like requiring approvals for U.S. person queries in the Reforming Intelligence and Securing America Act, or RISA, would be enough to prevent greater violations of civil liberties. And we promised in turn that we would keep a close eye on how surveillance authorities are used during that time. This 2-year experiment is nearly complete now, and the results are alarming. We have witnessed an attack on the FBI's internal guardrails against abuse of Section 702 authorities, and an unprecedented increase in government surveillance, and an alarming coziness between the government and big tech, all of which puts Americans' data and civil liberties in jeopardy. We must strengthen federal law to protect American privacy and liberty, and Congress can start with FISA Section 702. As everybody in the room knows, 702 was never meant to apply to American citizens. Under the law, the government can only collect communications from targets who meet 2 criteria. 1, they've got to be non-U.S. persons, and 2, they've got to be located overseas. Americans and people on U.S. soil are protected by the Fourth Amendment that prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures, guarantees the warrant requirement, and if law enforcement wants to look at American citizens' emails, they've got to get a warrant to do it. Despite all these protections, because Section 702 enables the intelligence community to ingest an incredible amount of data, American citizens' communications are often swept up in 702 collection. When that happens, those records end up in the FBI's massive database, and under current law, the FBI can search that database for U.S. person identifiers like Americans' names and street addresses for evidence of potential crimes or threats to national security. And as the chairman says, 10,000 people have access to that. Administrations of both parties have repeatedly abused this trove of U.S. person data. Recent audits show that FBI has searched the 702 database for candidates for federal office, Black Lives Matter protesters, and federal contractors, among other Americans who ought to be protected. 2 years since we enacted RISA, however you might have felt about the modest changes in that bill, the landscape has changed. For years, the leaders of this committee have warned of how executive branch surveillance powers could be abused by administrations that don't show sufficient care for the protection of civil liberties, and who use cutting-edge technology to spy on Americans, and who ignore basic principles of due process and constitutional freedom to achieve their own ends. In 2025, we know that we were right to worry. Here's just one example. I've been concerned for years about the U.S. government purchasing and compiling data about our own people. That problem has been compounded in this administration, which is actively building profiles on American citizens by combining data traditionally siloed in separate agencies, your tax returns, your health records, any interactions with police, with information purchased from tech companies. The administration is breaking down the very few guardrails that still exist on protecting our privacy, enabling the executive branch to track the movements of dissenters and supporters alike. So we have a lot to be concerned about at this point. I'm glad we're proceeding in a bipartisan way for the legislative defense of essential constitutional civil liberties. I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses today on how we can properly protect American civil freedom in this perilous era. And I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman, the balance of my time.
Jamie Raskin's remarks present Section 702 as a defining test of whether the United States can balance national security with constitutional democracy in a rapidly evolving technological age. While acknowledging that foreign intelligence collection plays an important role in protecting the country, Raskin makes clear that the program's current operation has drifted far from its original intent and now poses a direct threat to Americans' fundamental rights. Section 702 was designed to target non-U.S. persons located abroad, not American citizens at home. Yet, through the sheer scale of modern data collection, the communications of Americans are routinely swept into government databases and made searchable by thousands of officials without a warrant. Raskin emphasizes that Congress knowingly gave the executive branch a 2-year trial period when it last reauthorized Section 702, trusting assurances that internal safeguards and modest reforms would prevent abuse. That experiment, he argues, has failed. Instead of restraint, Congress has witnessed a weakening of internal guardrails, an explosion in surveillance activity, and repeated examples of Americans being improperly queried, including political candidates, protesters, and ordinary citizens with no connection to national security threats. These incidents are not hypothetical risks. They are documented abuses that reveal systemic vulnerabilities in how surveillance authorities are used. More troubling, Raskin situates Section 702 within a much broader surveillance ecosystem that has expanded dramatically under the current administration. He warns that the federal government is no longer merely collecting foreign intelligence, but is actively assembling detailed profiles on American citizens by merging sensitive data from across agencies, tax records, health information, law enforcement interactions, with commercially purchased data from private technology companies. This convergence of government power and corporate data, he argues, creates unprecedented capacity for tracking, monitoring, and chilling lawful dissent, regardless of political ideology. At the heart of Raskin's concern is the erosion of Fourth Amendment protections. The warrant requirement is not a procedural inconvenience. It is a constitutional safeguard meant to prevent exactly this kind of unchecked government intrusion. When intelligence tools designed for foreign surveillance are repurposed for domestic searches, constitutional boundaries collapse. Raskin warns that without meaningful judicial oversight, surveillance authorities become instruments not of security, but of control, capable of being weaponized by any administration willing to push legal limits. Raskin's message is not anti-security, but pro-constitution. He repeatedly stresses that national safety and civil liberty are not mutually exclusive, and that Congress has both the authority and responsibility to ensure intelligence programs operate within strict legal boundaries. Failing to act would normalize mass surveillance as a permanent feature of American life, leaving future administrations with expansive powers to monitor citizens with minimal accountability. As Section 702 approaches its expiration, Raskin frames the moment as a crossroads. Congress can either reaffirm constitutional principles by strengthening privacy protections, limiting warrantless searches of Americans' data, and restoring meaningful oversight, or it can accept a future where surveillance grows unchecked and constitutional rights are treated as collateral damage. His closing appeal underscores the urgency of the task ahead. In an era of powerful technology and fragile democratic norms, protecting civil liberties is not optional. It is the very measure of whether the United States remains a constitutional republic governed by law rather than by surveillance power.
They told us it was for national security. They lied. What Jamie Raskin just laid bare is the terrifying reality of a surveillance state that has turned its high-tech weapons inward, away from foreign threats and directly at the American people, under the guise of FISA Section 702. The corporate government complex has built a digital dragnet that doesn't just catch terrorists, it harvests your life. This is the ultimate tool of the corporate elite, while the GOP pretends to care about freedom. They have spent decades expanding the legal loopholes that allow federal agencies to bypass the Fourth Amendment. They want a population that is watched, indexed, and intimidated. When the government and big tech get this cozy, democracy doesn't just die in darkness, it dies in a database. The MAGA movement talks a big game about the deep state, but look at the receipts. Conservative leadership has consistently voted to keep these warrantless searches alive because it serves their true masters, the military-industrial complex and the tech oligarchs. They aren't worried about the deep state unless it's investigating their own corruption. For the rest of us, They're happy too. Let the spying continue. Raskin's experiment is over, and the results are a nightmare. They didn't just accidentally sweep up data. They intentionally targeted Black Lives Matter protesters and political dissenters. This is how the right wing uses the state to crush grassroots movements. They use your tax dollars to build profiles on your health, your finances, and your movement for the ultimate challenge. Imagine a world where your medical records, your tax returns, and your private messages are all merged into a single dissident profile that isn't science fiction. It's the 2025 reality Raskin is describing. The GOP and their corporate donors want a world where every protest is tracked and every activist is flagged before they even step into the street. It is a war on the working class waged through fiber optic cables. We cannot modestly reform our way out of tyranny. The current administration and the GOP-controlled factions are breaking down the last guardrails of privacy to protect the interests of the 1%. They are weaponizing the law to achieve a level of control that would make a dictator jealous. They call it intelligence collection. We call it what it is, a corporate-sponsored assault on the U.S. Constitution. The Fourth Amendment is not a procedural inconvenience for the government to ignore. It is the only thing standing between us and a total surveillance state. By allowing warrantless searches of American citizens, the political elite have signaled that your rights are collateral damage in their pursuit of absolute power. They have turned our own technology into a leash, and it's getting tighter every single day. The time for bipartisan experiments is over. We have seen what happens when we trust the FBI and the GOP to police themselves. They abuse the power. They target the marginalized, and they protect the powerful. We are at a crossroads. We either demand the total restoration of our privacy, or we accept a future where we are all permanent suspects in a country we no longer recognize.